The ball was held in the Great Hall, a place Kuro was in no hurry to visit again. He was surprised that they allowed him back into the room after the incident with the throne, but he supposed, having already destroyed the most precious thing there, they were less concerned about his presence. As with other Tirnanogian tradition, the dance had rigorous protocols to follow lest anyone suffer the incalculable discomfort of not knowing exactly what they should be doing, with whom, at any given moment. It was to be held in the Ceilidh style, where rows of partners faced each other and rotated a set amount each song. This practice prevented the dual traumas of potentially having to ask someone to dance or having to either accept or reject said invitation, the embarrassment of which could be quite fatal to a gentle person of the summer court. With the dance list and rotation plans shared well in advance, some careful counting could allow an individual to predict their partners and, at least for a couple of dances, ensure they were paired with a person of their choosing. Of course, with everyone in the room simultaneously doing the same, it became a game of subtle intrigue, cordially jockeying for position without exposing intentions. Through careful positioning, one might enjoy a dance with a paramour during one of the more romantic numbers. Matchmakers could engineer a chance encounter between potential partners, or merchants of chaos might insert themselves to force rivals to endure each other's company. All of this had been explained in detail before leaving Avalon. However, the subtlety and decorum expected of the nobility had not soaked into the student body. Lines formed only in the loosest of definitions, while people fought for spots and dashed about without any of the manners demanded by the formal setting. Kuro, being uniquely unqualified to participate in any of the partner picking, chose instead to make himself an uncomplicated part of the calculus for others. He picked a spot in the very last line, facing the doors. That way, anyone who wanted to avoid him could do so easily. It also let him avoid looking at the royal dais and its missing throne. He was well enough aware of his failings without the void left in his destructive wake reminding him. The first few dances were with the first years, who hadn't yet learned to put effort into avoiding him. They were fun to dance with as their size and inexperience closely matched Kuro's. However, they were frustratingly chatty. While Kuro was trying to attend to the rhythm of the reels and dance instructions woven through the lyrics, his partners demanded that he explain what had happened, how he'd done it, and whether he was secretly the heir to the Summer Throne. He really needed to get the older students to explain to their juniors that Kuro was meant to be shunned. He couldn't handle this many people wanting to talk to him. His next partner was less inclined to speak with him. As the lines of people finished their migrations, he found himself facing Azalea Lamorak. Whatever arithmetic she had done to choose partners had failed to avoid him, and she seemed furious. Her normally pallid complexion was flushed, and she refused to look him in the eye, instead staring fixedly at the floor as the gentle waltz started up. She quietly seethed as they swept to and fro, fighting to control her breathing and emotions so she didn't accidentally ignite anything. She exhibited extraordinary restraint in not spontaneously challenging him to another duel. The focus apparently required to prevent herself from attacking him did not help her dance form, and several times they brushed hands and bumped shoulders. Those gentle touches bothered the West Wind, who took offense at anyone touching her beloved while she was unable to do so. She buffeted Azalea, and Kuro worried that the girl would take the windy rebukes as the sort of offense that would tip her over the edge of simmering anger into boiling rage. She persevered with shocking grace, however. She was even able to muster the cordiality to thank him, out loud, for the dance, and offer an elegant curtsy and a shy but charming smile. He managed to clumsily return the gesture, though almost missed the chance as he was too stunned at first to move. The next dance was worse. After watching in bemusement as Azalea walked off to whomever would have the displeasure of being her next partner, he turned to find he was now face to face with Evelyn Lemieux. Even after rounds of vigorous leaps and twirls, she looked immaculate. Her golden locks were still perfectly ordered. Not a buckle or button out of place on her outfit. She could have walked right out of a portrait onto the dance floor. He was still so rattled by the experience with Azalea that he wasn't ready to restrain his reactions. A sigh accompanied by a blast of disapproval from the west wind unsettling Evelyn's hair was not the greeting expected for someone of her pedigree.
"Have you no dignity?"
she sneered as a lively jig started up. She spoke as though that were meant as an insult, that dignity was something to which everyone aspired. As someone who had begged for every coin he'd held, and eaten most of his meals out of the trash, he considered dignity a trait reserved for those who had never had to choose between it and starvation. His lack of it meant he could focus on the complex footwork demanded of the dance without dignifying her question with a response. Evelyn's feet seemed able to follow the moves without her intervention, leaving her free to berate Kuro. "From our first introduction, you have been invariably rude." That accusation demanded far more of his cognitive power than was available, and several other processes shut down to allow him to process the absurdity. His eyes lost focus, his legs staggered along with the music, and his jaw began to move as if chewing on her words could extract some essence of sense from them. Rude? He'd made every effort to avoid her. He stayed out of her way, her attention, and as much as possible her line of sight. Meanwhile, she'd insulted and threatened his friends, attempted to get Arthur expelled for merely existing, and Kuro arrested at every opportunity, and yet he was rude? Had her mind been addled by all the enchanted creams required to maintain such a flawless complexion? Or was she merely too wealthy to have experienced anything less than adoration? A simple, "What?" tumbled out of his mouth, but he regretted asking for clarification before she started giving it. "Well, to start," she continued dancing flawlessly despite Kuro having come to a dead halt. "It is considered polite to look at the person with whom one is conversing. Could you have the courtesy to look me in the eye while you are talking to me?" No, he couldn't. Not even if he wanted to. He couldn't talk to people. He wasn't allowed. It had been forbidden by Phineas, so he spoke instead to the walls and floors. He'd been doing it so long that he'd forgotten that other people didn't. His failure to respond with anything but slack-jawed bewilderment provided her with an opportunity to continue. "Furthermore, your constant antics disrupt and disrespect your classmates, who, unlike you, endeavor to take their studies seriously." Was that how people thought of Kuro's classroom disasters? Was he just a clown to them? He'd struggled every day since arriving to fit in, to stay beneath notice, to pass the classes he was so terribly equipped for, and they thought he was goofing off? The realization would have been infuriating if it weren't so exhausting. "Since our first meeting on the Princess," Evelyn continued, "you have been unpleasant and impolite to myself and anyone else who might steal away your spotlight." A slight huff and an upturned nose indicated that she had reached the conclusion of her analysis of his character flaws. His initial speechlessness seemed to indicate that she had succeeded in shaming him. However, in Kuro's view, she had only embarrassed herself. She had remembered incorrectly about their first meeting. "March 15th, he said, staring fixedly at her beautifully polished shoes. While similar to those everyone else wore, they were just a bit more refined in a slightly different style. "What?" Evelyn startled, but her feet didn't miss a beat. "That's your birthday, right?" said Kuro, his feet now giving up any attempt at dancing. "At least that's the day your parents brought you to Wingtips to buy those shoes." "How do you know that?" She was rattled but too committed to the dance to actually seek escape. Kuro couldn't forget that night. That was when his entire life was upended for both better and worse, the night Phineas had been captured. She didn't know the importance of that night, nor did she need to. Kuro, however, felt it somehow important to correct the record, for her to recognize him for who he was when they first met. "There was a beggar outside the shop that night," Kuro said, helping her to make a connection that time in a school uniform might have hidden from her. "A short, filthy boy, about your age, begging for a coin or two after you spent more than he'd ever see on a pair of shoes, enchanted to make you look slightly more elegant than you already are. Instead of sparing a single penny, you and your rich parents passed him by while you complained about wanting ice cream." Kuro broke from staring at the enchanted shoes to make the eye contact she had demanded of someone conversing with her. She stared back at him in vacant bewilderment. The same look as his classmates whenever Mrs. Lovelace claimed a topic was review from the year before. Undeniably true, but finding no purchase whatsoever in her memory. It wasn't that Evelyn had failed to recognize Kuro as the beggar from that night. She had failed to remember the beggar at all. He occupied no more of her mind than any other piece of litter. While he might have failed to change her understanding of him, her reaction confirmed everything he believed about her. The last bars of the song petered out, and Kuro gave his dance partner the flourishing curtsy expected of any polite attendee at such a gathering, and then wandered off to find his friends without receiving one in return. It was break time after all, and Kuro was in need of something refreshing in terms of both drink and company. Marie was the first to join him, and she marched up on a mission. "What did you say to Evelyn?" she asked as though complimenting him on some thorough villainy, and gestured to some commotion by the door. She did most of the talking. He turned to see his recent dance partner, waving off her entourage and walking out of the hall as if nature were calling quite loudly. "I really just told her who I am." "I think she knows who you are," scoffed Marie. "I'm not so sure," responded Kuro. While Kuro would have liked his friend's insights into his confusing exchange with Evelyn, their conversation became a casualty, as so many had before, of the inescapable and destructive impact the arrival of Charlie had. "Oh my gosh, I just danced with Estrid Hildesdottir, the one with the braids, right? From the year ahead of us, and she let me spin her like a top, and it was amazing! And also I danced with one of the Bjorns and Freya, kind of a run of Wertheimers altogether, but also Azalea's big sister Bella, who was a pretty good time, and also Jennifer Tanaka." She interrupted herself to wave at her recent partner. "Thanks for the dance, Jennifer," she shouted, before returning to her previous thought without either pausing for breath or explaining how she'd managed to have more partners than there were dances. "And there was the one girl with all the pink that you did for her, Marie, who wasn't great to dance with, but was fun to look at anyway. And Magnus and Sean, and oh hey, Arthur, I danced with your sister." "Is she okay?" he asked with his usual lack of expression, which left it entirely unclear what he meant by the question. "She was a good enough dancer," she replied, choosing that interpretation over what may have been a reasonable concern for Moira's safety. "But she didn't want to do any spins or anything that wasn't in the instructions." During the moment's pause provided by Charlie downing a glass of water, Kuro observed, "You seem to be having a good time, Arthur." Those who did not know Arthur as well might have missed it, as it didn't read on his face at all. But there was an ease to his movements and a luster to his complexion that only came out in the rare instances Arthur was feeling confident. "More than I expected," he agreed. "The dance instructions are all easy to follow, and I can adjust myself to be the ideal dance partner." "I thought you seemed a little duller than normal," observed Marie. Charlie's glass empty, she rejoined the conversation with her typical gusto. "How about you, Marie? Did you have any good dance partners?" An accompanying wiggle of her eyebrows demanded some level of salacious gossip from her roommate. "I don't even know," she groaned in response. "There's no way to tell if someone is dancing with you because they want to or because they counted wrong." "That's part of the romance, the uncertainty of it all," explained Charlie, tossing an arm over her friend and encouraging her to gaze out over the sea of students with new eyes. "Is the stranger before you desperate for a single second in your company? Is this the moment that old rivals see something new in each other? Could an unexpected pairing be fate intervening to introduce you to your destined love?" "Seems like a terrible system," observed Arthur. Charlie scowled. "Y'all wouldn't know romance if it came up and punched you." "And you would?" said Marie. "Not a chance," admitted Charlie. "That's why I intend to do the punching." She pounded a fist into her palm to emphasize her point just as the chimes sounded, warning it was time to resume dancing. Repeating his strategy of staying very still while the rest of the school maneuvered for the best possible position for fate to intervene in their love lives did not have at all the expected effect. The second dance had Kuro once again across from Azalea, who was so red in the face that he worried for the limbs of whomever had conspired to ruin her evening thus. Looking everywhere except at her in an effort to avoid encountering the burning glare she was attempting to deliver, his eyes landed on Evelyn. They would not have lingered there, but something seemed wrong with her, and he couldn't place it. His distraction garnered Azalea's attention. She craned her neck to follow his gaze, then groaned with derision. "Ogling the spring flower?" "What?" Kuro was snapped from his musings. "Oh, no, it's just... I think something's wrong with her." "It's fine," responded his dance partner in a manner which made it clear precisely how fine it wasn't. "You don't have to lie. Half the school fancies her. Kuro failed to restrain a laugh, which earned the judgment of dancers all around him. Why? She's terrible. That comment earned an astonished snort from Azalea and from couples to either side of them, who were now unabashedly eavesdropping. She's pretty, explained Azalea. So are pixies, replied Kuro, looking back at the young woman in question. They're still venomous. Evelyn was, as always, the picture of beauty and grace, but he felt like something was off about her. Kuro was about to decide his imagination was taking too many lessons from Charlie's when it struck him. She was focused. She wasn't glancing about or casually conversing. She was paying attention to her footwork. She took off her shoes, he mumbled. No, she didn't, Azalea argued after they spun past each other, giving her a clearer view. She's wearing the same ones as the rest of us. Kuro stumbled through the hops and shuffles of the dance while he tried to interpret Evelyn's actions. His initial concern that the shoes were meant to be a secret, and by admitting knowledge of them, he had exposed himself to danger. He didn't doubt that the Lemieux family would dispose of someone like him for their own security. The quieter, more rational part of his brain tried to explain that that was nonsense. Those shoes were proudly on display in the window of a well-known store in the biggest city in the Three Kingdoms. They couldn't be a secret. They were worn with pride to show off how rich she was. He was just beginning to contemplate the possibility that he had somehow shamed her, which would require her to be capable of feeling shame, when his thoughts were derailed entirely. Why did you bring Autolycus? He made Azalea say it again, and then had to repeat it back to himself several times before the words made sense. I didn't, he said. He's back in my room. No, he's taking a crumpet from the buffet table, corrected Azalea, just loudly enough for Kuro to hear. As the dance demanded they swap places, Kuro took the opportunity to scan the tables of refreshments at the side of the room. He caught the last traces of a gray paw pulling a griddle cake into the shadows beneath the table dressing. You need to get him out of here, Azalea ordered. Why? He's probably happy. Because, she said, neither raccoons nor familiars are welcome here. If someone finds him, they'll pop him. Well, if I go, Sir McCool will definitely find him. Kuro paused for a moment to check, and he could still feel the steady gaze of the knight on him. He's watching me like a very bored hawk. What if I distracted him for you? How would you do that? Kuro asked, followed by an equally important question. Why would you do that? Rather than responding, she gave him a look of righteous indignation, took a deep preparatory breath, and began coughing. It was a heaving, racking cough, the kind that bulged veins and threatened to invert lungs. She crashed to the ground and clutched at her chest as she fought for breath. Like a diving raptor, McCool swept in and lifted the girl from her knees. He led her from the hall, the attention of the entire dance floor following them out the door. In that moment of distraction, Kuro vanished. Being unseen didn't require him to be invisible, just to not be where people were looking. He slid out of line, but kept the rhythm of the dance so as to not draw attention. He joined the wallflowers by the refreshments. A quick gust of wind knocking over an abandoned glass pulled the focus of anyone nearby and provided an opportunity to slip under the table. What are you doing here? He snarled as loudly as he dared. How did you even get out of the room? Autolycus didn't even try to look ashamed. The floor around him was littered with half-eaten treats, and his paws were glistening with jam. The arrival of a grouchy creator barely interrupted the sampling of pastries. If someone finds you, you're gonna get popped. You know that, right? That news gave the raccoon pause. He scooped as many buns as he could up in his tiny arms and waddled to Kuro. Upon discovering that his maker hadn't worn his battered leather bag to a royal ball, the familiar gave a look of indignant shock. I shouldn't have needed it, rebutted Kuro. Now we're bringing you back to our room. Another scowl from the furry troublemaker. Yes, we, together. I don't trust that you won't just scamper off into the kitchens. They waited for the song to end, and while the whole room was shuffling into new positions and trading greetings, together they slipped out a servant's entrance and into the palace halls. Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.